Hey, happy Friday. I'm visiting family without the camera, so it's just my voice today. But this week, Microsoft said that the brand new Copilot recall feature will eat 25 to 150 gigabytes of memory on your computer. Samsung just potentially became a repairability nightmare, and we learned that the foldable MacBook might be real. Welcome to the Friday Checkout. This video was sponsored by Brilliant. We start the brief with a new report from Bloomberg, which claims that Humane, which has just released its AI pin, is trying to get sold. And the crazy thing is that this company thinks that they're worth between $750 million to $1 billion. Imagine flopping so hard that you have to give up selling your company as soon as your first product launches, but then still asking for $1 billion. These people must be high on some Silicon Valley substance. Anyway, in more strange AI news, Yola is now making a privacy-focused AI assistant. Their solution is built around the idea of a personal server. There's a fancy-looking box involved, and if you're like, wait a second, haven't I heard of this brand before? Then yes, they're the same Finnish company that built the random alternative OS called Sailfish. Moving on, Nvidia this week announced its most insane earnings yet, with sales being up 262% year over year on the back of AI chip demand. Their stock shot up yet again, straight to the moon, and the company is now worth something like $2.5 trillion, which is way more than companies like Amazon, Alphabet, and even more than double that of Meta. At this pace, they will be the world's most valuable company in just a few weeks, which is pretty insane. Anyway, moving on, you know how regulators forced Apple to allow alternative browsers to be usable in the EU? Well, Apple figured out yet another screw you to their developers by making it impossible to test their browsers on iPhones physically outside of the EU while developing said browsers. You can still use an emulator, but yeah, that's nice and petty. And moving on, our first new release this week is the Sonos Ace, which is the company's first set of high-end headphones. They cost a very luxurious $449 and they supposedly sound pretty good, but their main party trick is that they can pair up with your home speakers in various ways. And then the rest of our release monitor is going to be all the new Snapdragon PCs, which Microsoft claims will beat the M3 Max in performance. Sadly, still no reviewers were given any proper models, so we're frustratingly still waiting for third-party verified numbers, despite the laptops themselves already being up for pre-order. Anyway, Microsoft released the Surface Pro and the Surface Laptop, and the laptop is the company's first major redesign in multiple years. Both models are starting at pretty reasonable prices of around $1,000. Then Samsung announced the Galaxy Book Edge 4 as its only Snapdragon model. Lenovo released the Yoga Slim 7X and the ThinkPad T14S Gen 6, which both actually look very nice. Dell announced Snapdragon versions of the XPS 13 as well as Inspiron and Latitude models. Asus and Acer both announced one device each, which seems to be a bit more budget-oriented. HP announced two new 14-inch Snapdragon models. And finally, Qualcomm itself announced the Snapdragon Dev Kit for $899 with an X Elite, 32 gigs of RAM, and a 512 gig SSD. I think this one might actually be interesting beyond just developers as well. Weirdly, only the Surface and the Lenovo machine actually offer 5G, and all others are Wi-Fi only, which is quite a surprise given that the previous generation Snapdragon models were all about that 5G. And perhaps most interestingly, Dell actually gave us a direct price comparison as they have a Snapdragon X Elite version of the XPS 13, which costs $100 less than the identically spec'd Intel i7 one. I think that's pretty good and a decent indication that indeed the chips themselves might be cheaper this year from Qualcomm. Okay, so those are my devices, and my first story of the week will be all the weird things that we've learned about Microsoft's wild new recall feature. This is the feature that basically takes screenshots of everything that you do and then lets you do insane searches like, what was the chart with purple writing that I saw earlier, to pull up the actual PPT file with something like that in it from days before. So at the event, Microsoft introduced the term Copilot PCs. This is a minimum spec requirement of a laptop having at least 16 gigs of RAM, a 256 gig SSD, as well as an NPU that can deliver 40 TOPS of AI performance. Not a bad baseline, but I was wondering why storage was a minimum spec for an AI badge. Well, support documents have since shown us that Windows Recall will use between 25 to 150 gigabytes of storage by default, depending on how much storage you have in your device. This amount is basically reserved for screenshots from Recall unless you turn the feature off, and if you use it more then it might last a few weeks, or if you use it less then maybe multiple months. Either way, there is just so much storage. Now on the one hand, it's kind of nice that both the storage and the processing is happening on the device with the device's new AI chip called the NPU. But even so, the fact that your OS is literally watching and remembering everything that you do, including potentially usernames, passwords, etc., is just so creepy. And of course, there's no guarantee that Microsoft won't change its mind later to start storing things in the cloud or to analyze what you do to better serve ads or something like that, instead of just helping you with your recall. Privacy advocates and governments are ringing the alarm bells, and while I'm sure that the masses will once again happily trade their privacy for what seems like a genuinely useful feature, I'm personally happy that the option to switch the feature off overall is there for now. Okay, for my second story of the week, Samsung got into a big fight with the repair community. First, iFixit announced ending its collaboration with Samsung, saying that they, quote, doubt Samsung's commitment to making repair more accessible. Ouch. Apparently, Samsung basically refused to improve the repairability of their devices, and the price of many of their components wasn't actually competitive, so iFixit will no longer be Samsung's designated third-party parts and tools distributor. It will stop developing new repair manuals for Samsung devices, and it will instead sell both Samsung original and aftermarket parts, whichever they can get their hands on. But maybe even worse is that 404 Media found that Samsung requires independent repair shops to share customer data and to snitch on people who use aftermarket parts, including instructing them to immediately disassemble devices that have parts not purchased from Samsung. This is really disheartening because Samsung actually started to have a really nice list of devices up for DIY repair, including even some foldables. At the time of writing, Samsung hasn't actually made a statement yet, but I bet that this means some people in the company want to make repairability a thing, but then the management in the company decided to just actually prioritize making money instead. Okay, and for my third story of the week, Apple supply chain analyst Ming-chi detailed some key elements about a foldable MacBook. That's right, a foldable MacBook. LG Display has been picked as the panel supplier with two options, a 20-inch along with an 18-inch panel, which would fold down to around 13 to 15 inches each. He is expecting assembly in the first half of 2026 and the cost of around $600 to $650 for the panels and another $200 to $250 for the hinge, which is of course extremely high. Kuo thinks that the machine would therefore likely have to cost about as much as a Vision Pro or around $3,500 if Apple wants to hit its usual margins with those costs, which is obviously quite a lot. That said, the 16-inch MacBook Pro currently already starts at $2,500, so maybe it's not a completely ridiculous price for a new form factor. Of course, Apple is always building prototypes and exploring supply chain options, which doesn't necessarily result in final products, so all of this might or might not come to the market in the end, but Kuo even has a shipment estimate, which is that it will exceed 1 million units in 2026. That is actually pretty soon and not a very small number at all, so who knows? Now, I imagine that working in a lab of a company like Apple on the next big device category must be one of the most fun jobs in the world, and if building products like that is what you'd like your career to be, then check out Brilliant. It's an online learning platform that teaches you to think like an engineer or a scientist. They have a ton of STEM courses that cover maths, physics, chemistry, computer science, and more. You get a whole path that starts at beginner levels and then takes you all the way to advanced concepts like machine learning, large language models, and more. And all the courses are designed so that big concepts are broken down into many smaller learnings, and then those are practiced right away with interactive tests to make sure that you practice and fully understand what you've just learned. Not only is this just way more fun than simply reading a book, it's also proven to help you retain the knowledge much better. And if you want a recommendation, I particularly like the course on how LLMs or large language models actually work. To try everything that Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/TFC or click on the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription if you choose to get one. Happy learning, and I'll see you next Friday.